and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking all about Docker.
Nice.
Whether you're prepping for like a meeting or you're just curious to learn more about it, we'll break down exactly what Docker is and like all those little essential pieces like Docker files and images.
Yeah,
So it can seem kind of complicated, but it's a pretty simple idea at its core.
it is.
Like imagine you've got this amazing app that you built that's going to be the next big thing, right?
What?
But getting it to run on different computer servers, all that jazz can be a real pain.
Yeah.
So Docker comes in and packages your app and everything it needs to run into a container.
Yeah. It's like shipping a package.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter what's inside. The container's always the same,
Yeah.
making it easy to move around.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And that container is like a standardized unit of software.
Exactly. It packages the code
Yeah.
and everything else it needs to run reliably no matter where it ends up.
So that solves the whole, but it works on my machine problem.
Totally. That's like one of the main reasons why developers love Docker.
Okay, so Docker is this container thing that solves a ton of headaches for developers.
Yep.
Makes sense why it's so popular, but like, what else makes it so great?
So developers, they face a lot of challenges like making sure their apps work the same everywhere, using resources efficiently, and handling like sudden spikes in traffic. Docker tackles these challenges head on.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more. What makes it so special?
Well, it basically boils down to four big advantages:
Okay, let's hear them.
portability, reproducibility, efficiency, and scalability.
Okay, so starting with portability.
Right, so Docker containers can run on like any machine that has Docker installed. Like it could be your laptop or a server in the cloud.
Oh, wow, so anywhere at all.
Pretty much anywhere. And since the container has everything the app needs, there are no more compatibility nightmares.
So no more pulling your hair out trying to figure out why it works one place but not another.
No more late nights trying to fix those weird bugs.
I like the sound of that. All right, so what about reproducibility?
Reproducibility. So that makes sure your app behaves the same no matter where it's running.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, so whether it's like development testing or in production, you get the same result every single time.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So it's kind of like having a recipe that always makes the same cake no matter who's baking it or what oven they're using?
Exactly. That's reproducibility in a nutshell.
Nice. You mentioned efficiency before, too, about the containers being lightweight.
Oh yeah, they're super lightweight because they share the host operating system's kernel.
Okay, I'm not really a tech person. Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. So unlike virtual machines, which need their own operating system, Docker containers, they run directly on the host OS.
Huh.
So it's kind of like they're sharing resources instead of each needing their own separate set.
So they're more efficient with resources.
Exactly. And that means you can run more apps on the same hardware, which can save you money and make things faster for users.
Okay, so efficiency, A&D, cost savings. That's pretty awesome. All right, but what about when those user traffic spikes hit? How does Docker help with that?
That's where scalability swoops in. Imagine your app suddenly blows up and you have like a ton of new users.
That's the dream, right?
Right. So with Docker, you can spin up new containers really quickly to handle that increased load.
So it can like adapt on the fly.
Exactly. And when things calm down, you can easily scale back down, saving you resources.
So Docker's like a chameleon adapting to whatever comes its way.
Yeah, something like that. It's portable, reproducible, efficient, A&D, scalable. No wonder everyone's talking about it.
Yeah, Docker really seems like the whole package.
It is.
But now I'm kind of curious about like the nitty-gritty, how it all works behind the scenes.
Sure. Let's get into it.
Perfect. So what are like the key components that make Docker tick?
Okay, so there are 5 main things you need to know about: Docker engine, Docker image, Docker hub, Docker file, and Docker registry.
All right, let's break them down one by one.
Sounds good.
What exactly is the Docker engine?
So the Docker engine is basically the heart of the system. It's the software that manages all your containers, images, and everything in between.
Okay, so it's like the control center, the brains of the operation.
You got it.
All right, what about Docker images then?
So think of a Docker image as the blueprint for creating a container. It's like this read-only template that has all the instructions, components needed to build your app environment.
Interesting. So it's like a super detailed recipe that tells you exactly how to make a dish.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Okay, so then is Docker Hub like the cookbook?
You got it.
Yeah.
Docker Hub is this huge online library where you can find and share pre-built Docker images.
Whoa, so it's like a one-stop shop for Docker images.
Exactly. It's a treasure trove of ready-to-use images that can save you so much time and effort.
That's amazing. So if I need like a specific image for a web server or a database, I can just find it on Docker Hub.
Yep, exactly.
Wow, that's super convenient. Okay, so what about Docker files? Where do they fit into all of this?
So a Docker file is basically a set of instructions that you write to tell Docker how to build a custom image for your app.
Oh,
It's a plain text file, but it's super powerful because it guides the whole image creation process step by step.
so it's like writing a script for automating the image building process.
Exactly. Yeah.
And lastly, what's a Docker registry?
A Docker registry is where Docker images are stored. It's
Yeah.
kind of like a warehouse for images.
Gotcha. So Docker Hub is like a massive public registry, right?
Yep, that's right. But you can also have private registries within your organization or on cloud platforms.
Oh, that makes sense. So it's kind of like choosing between keeping your recipes in a public library or a private vault.
Exactly. You have the flexibility to choose what works best for you.
Cool. Okay, so we've got the Docker engine managing everything images as blueprints, Docker Hub as the image supermarket, Docker files for custom images, and registries for storage.
Yep, you got it.
Okay. I think I'm starting to see the bigger picture here, but how do all these pieces actually work together? Can you tell me more about like the architecture of Docker?
Sure. So imagine you're at a restaurant. You're the hungry customer, right?
Haha. Okay, I can picture that.
You're the Docker client. You place your order your commands to the Docker daemon, who's like the chef in the kitchen making it all happen.
I like that analogy. So the Docker daemon takes my commands and executes them.
Exactly.
But do they have to be on the same computer?
Not necessarily. The client and daemon can actually be on the same system, or they can talk to each other remotely over a network.
Oh, so they can be in different places.
Yep. And they communicate using a special language called the REST API.
Wow, so they have their own way of talking to each other.
That's right. That's how they stay in sync.
This is making a lot more sense now, but there's one thing that's always kind of confused me, the difference between Docker images and Docker containers.
Ah, yeah, that's a common one. Think of it this way. An image is like a cookie cutter.
Okay, our cookie cutter.
Yeah, it's the blueprint, the
Yeah,
template.
totally.
It doesn't change. A container is like the actual cookie, the running instance of that image.
Okay, so if I have my cookie cutter, which is the Docker image, and I use it to make a cookie, that cookie is the Docker container.
Precisely. You can have multiple containers running from the same image, just like you could bake a bunch of cookies from the same cookie cutter.
Each cookie or container is unique, but they all come from the same blueprint.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes way more sense. Can you give me like a real-world example?
Sure. So let's say you have an Ubuntu image with like the Nginx web server installed.
Mm.
When you run that image, you create a container with Nginx actually running on Ubuntu. And you could even create another container from that same image, and you'd have two separate instances of Nginx running.
So the image is like the potential, and the container is that potential brought to life.
Exactly. That's a great way to think about it.
Awesome. Now let's go back to that giant library of Docker images, Docker Hub.
Sure.
What makes it so special?
Well, Docker Hub is like the go-to place for finding and sharing Docker images. Anyone can download public images, or you can make private repositories for your own custom images.
Oh, that's cool. So it's a great place to collaborate with other developers.
Exactly. It's like a community hub for all things Docker.
I like it. But what if I want to keep my images private, secret?
That's where private repositories come in. You can have your own private registries or use like cloud-based services to store your images securely.
So it's like having your own little secret stash of Docker images.
Pretty much.
I like it. Okay, so now let's move on to Docker Compose. What is that all about?
So Docker Compose is a tool for managing apps that are made up of multiple containers working together.
Okay, multiple containers all working together. That sounds complicated.
It can be, but Docker Compose makes it a lot easier. Think of it like an orchestra conductor.
An orchestra conductor.
Yeah, it coordinates all the different containers to make sure they're working together harmoniously.
So Docker Compose is like a maestro for your containers.
Exactly. It's super helpful for managing complex multi-container apps.
That makes a lot of sense. Speaking of simplifying things, tell me about Docker Desktop.
So Docker Desktop provides a really user-friendly way to interact with Docker.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it has a graphical interface, so you can manage containers, images, and all that without using the command line.
So it's like a visual control panel for Docker.
Exactly. It's great for people who prefer a more visual approach.
I bet. But is it still important to understand the command line too?
Oh, absolutely.
Huh.
While Docker Desktop is great for getting started, the command line gives you more flexibility and control, especially for more advanced stuff.
So it's kind of like learning to drive an automatic versus a stick shift?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Oh.
And both have their advantages.
All right, well, I'm definitely ready to learn some of those essential Docker commands.
Let's do it. All right, so let's dive into some of those essential Docker commands. Think of these as like your tools for navigating the Docker world.
Okay, I'm ready to add some tools to my Docker toolbox.
The first one you got to know is Docker run. That's how you'll launch a container from an image.
Okay, so if I have an image for like a web server, Docker run would spin up a container with that web server inside it.
Exactly. It's that simple.
Nice. Okay, what's next?
Next up is Docker pull. This one lets you download an image from a registry like Docker Hub.
So it's like going to the grocery store and getting ingredients for a recipe.
Yeah, it's like fetching a new recipe from your cookbook.
I like it. Okay, so what if I want to see what's currently running?
For that, you use Docker Ibits.
Mm-hmm.
That'll show you a list of all the active containers.
So it's like checking in on all your little Docker chefs to see what they're cooking up?
Uh-huh, exactly.
Okay, so are there commands for like starting and stopping containers too?
Yep. Docker stop will gracefully shut down a container, and Docker start will bring it back to life.
So it's like pausing and resuming the recipe.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And if you need to access private repositories, you can use Docker login to authenticate.
Okay. So those are the basics.
Yep. Those are some of the most essential commands you'll be using all the time.
Cool. I'm sure it takes practice to really get the hang of it though, right?
Definitely. But the more you use them, the more natural it'll become.
All right, so we've talked about the essential parts of Docker and some of the basic commands, but let's step back for a second. Why should developers or anyone really be excited about using Docker?
That's the big question, right? Well, Docker is way more than just a cool tech trend. It brings some serious benefits to the table.
Okay, I'm listening. What are these benefits you speak of?
Well, we talked about resource efficiency before. Remember how containers share the host OS kernel?
Yeah, it's like they're all sharing a pizza crust instead of each getting their own pizza.
Exactly. And that clever design means you can get more out of your hardware and maybe even save some money.
Okay, so more efficiency and cost savings. What else?
Another big advantage is version control. This is super important for development teams. Well, Docker lets you keep track of every change to your app and its dependencies. So you can easily go back to an older version if you need to.
Oh, so it's like having a detailed history of all the changes you've made.
Precisely. It's like having a time machine for your code.
That's pretty awesome. And what about microservices? I know that's a big thing in software development these days.
Yeah, microservices are huge, and Docker is a perfect fit for that kind of architecture.
How come?
Well, containers provide the perfect environment for running these small, independent services. Each service can run in its own little container without messing with the others.
So it's like having a bunch of specialized chefs all working on different parts of a meal.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Each chef can focus on their own dish without getting in each other's way.
And Docker makes it easy to scale things up or down too, right?
Exactly. If one service is getting slammed with traffic, you can just spin up more containers for that service. It's like having a flexible kitchen that can adapt to the number of orders coming in.
Okay, so we've got resource efficiency, version control, and microservices agility. Docker's sounding pretty impressive, but I have one question. How does it compare to virtual machines? I know they both offer some kind of virtualization, but I'm not really sure what the difference is.
That's a great question. It's a classic debate in the world of tech. The main difference is in their architecture.
Okay, tell me more.
Docker containers are lightweight, and they share the host OS kernel. So they provide isolation at the operating system level.
Okay.
Virtual machines, on the other hand, are heavier, and each one has its own separate operating system. So the isolation is at the hardware level.
So it's like sharing a pizza with your friends versus everyone ordering their own personal pizza.
Exactly. Containers share the same crust, the host OS kernel, while VMs each get their own entire pizza.
Okay, I think I'm getting it. So containers are good for efficiency and speed, and VMs are better if you need stronger isolation.
You got it. It all depends on what you're trying to achieve.
Awesome. Now let's talk about security. How secure is Docker? What kind of safeguards are in place?
Security is super important, and Docker takes it very seriously. There are several built-in security features.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
Well, for starters, containers provide isolation. This means that if one container gets compromised, it won't necessarily affect the others.
So it's like compartments in a ship. If one floods, the others are still safe.
Exactly. It helps to contain the damage.
That's good to know. What else?
Docker also promotes what's called immutable infrastructure.
Immutable infrastructure. What's that?
It basically means that container images are version controlled and changes are tracked very carefully, so you can easily roll back to a previous state if something goes wrong.
Oh, so it's like having a safety net.
Exactly. If something breaks, you can always go back to a known good state.
That's reassuring. What other security features are there?
You can also set resource limits for your containers. This prevents one container from hogging all the resources and affecting the other containers or even the whole system.
That's smart. It's like setting boundaries so everyone plays fair.
Right. And Docker also has security scanning tools that can help you find vulnerabilities in your images before you even deploy them.
So it's like having a security guard check for weaknesses before you open the doors to the public.
You got it. It's all about being proactive.
Docker really seems to have a pretty solid approach to security.
Yeah, they've definitely put a lot of thought into it.
Awesome. So now let's shift gears and talk about what you can actually do with Docker in the real world. What are some of the cool ways people are using it?
All right, let's get practical. One of the most popular use cases for Docker is in CI/CD pipelines.
CI/CD. I've heard of that, but can you refresh my memory?
No problem.
Mm-hmm.
CI/CD stands for continuous integration and continuous delivery. It's all about automating the process of getting your software from development to testing to production.
Ah, okay. So it's like having a smooth pipeline that takes your code from start to finish.
Exactly. And Docker fits perfectly into that pipeline. It makes it super easy to build, test, and deploy your apps in a consistent way.
So it's like a well-oiled machine that just churns out software like clockwork.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And it solves that pesky, it works on my machine problem.
That's huge. What other real-world uses are there?
Well, we talked about microservices earlier, and Docker is a natural fit for that architecture.
Right. Because each microservice can run in its own little container.
Exactly. It gives developers a ton of flexibility, and they can deploy updates without affecting the other parts of the app.
It's like having a team of chefs working on different parts of a meal. They can all work independently and then bring it all together in the end.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And since Docker's so scalable, it's easy to adapt to changing demands.
Right. If one service is getting hit with a lot of traffic, you can just spin up more containers for that service.
Exactly. It's like having a kitchen that can expand or contract based on how busy it is.
I love that analogy. Okay, so what about deploying apps across different cloud platforms? Can Docker help with that too?
Absolutely. Docker's super portable, so you can run your apps on any cloud provider that supports Docker.
So you're not stuck with just one provider.
Nope. You have the freedom to choose the best cloud environment for your needs.
So Docker is like a universal key that unlocks any cloud you want.
Yeah, pretty much. It gives you a lot of flexibility.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'm definitely sold on Docker. It seems like an incredibly powerful tool. But before we wrap up, let's talk about best practices. What are some tips for using Docker effectively and avoiding common pitfalls?
All right, so let's talk best practices. One of the coolest things about Docker is Docker Hub.
Yeah, it's amazing. So many images to choose from.
Exactly. And whenever you can, you should try to use official images from trusted sources.
Makes sense. They're probably more reliable, right?
Yeah, they're well-maintained, secure, and usually optimized for performance.
So it's like grabbing a recipe from a trusted cookbook instead of trying some random online recipe.
Exactly. You'll save yourself a lot of headaches.
All right, good to know. Any other tips?
Another thing to keep in mind is image size. Smaller images are faster to download, build, and deploy.
Okay, so like packing light for a trip makes it easier to move around.
Yep, exactly. You want your images to be lean and mean. Try using multi-stage builds, removing unnecessary files, and choosing small base images.
Gotcha. Keep it compact. What about managing complex apps with multiple containers? Any advice there?
Docker Compose is your best friend for that. It's perfect for defining your multi-container apps and streamlining the whole deployment process.
So it's like having a project manager to keep everything organized.
Yeah, kind of. It makes managing those complex setups a whole lot easier.
All right, Docker Compose it is. We've talked a lot about Docker security, but are there any other best practices I should know about to keep things safe?
Definitely. Security is an ongoing thing, so always stay up to date with the latest security practices.
Right, staying informed is key.
Exactly. Make sure you're regularly updating your images to patch vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And try to avoid running containers as root unless you absolutely have to.
Okay, good to know. Anything else?
One more thing, you can use network segmentation to isolate your containers from each other. That way, if one gets compromised, it's harder for the attacker to spread to the others.
So it's like having separate security zones.
Exactly. It adds another layer of protection.
Great. Well, I think we've covered a ton of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From the basics of Docker to real-world uses and best practices. I feel like a Docker pro now.
Huh. Awesome. Hopefully you feel more confident using Docker now.
Definitely. It's such a powerful and a versatile technology. But before we wrap up, I have one last thought.
Okay, what's that?
We've been talking about containerizing individual apps, but what happens when you have like hundreds or even thousands of containers to manage.
Yeah, that's a whole other ballgame. That's where container orchestration platforms like Kubernetes come in.
Kubernetes. I've heard that name before, but I don't really know what it is.
It's basically a system for managing and automating all those containers. It handles things like scheduling, networking, and even self-healing.
Whoa, so it's like having a conductor for a huge orchestra, making sure all the instruments are playing together in harmony.
Exactly. Kubernetes can manage massive deployments of containers and keep everything running smoothly.
Wow, Kubernetes sounds pretty amazing. Maybe we can do a deep dive on that sometime.
That's a great idea. It's definitely a topic worth exploring.
Awesome. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive on Docker.
Sad to see it end.
Me too. But hopefully you learned a lot about this game-changing technology.
For sure, Docker is a powerful tool that can make your life as a developer so much easier.
Totally. So whether you're just starting out with Docker or you're already using it, we hope you got some valuable insights from our conversation.
Definitely. And remember, the world of technology is always evolving, so keep learning, keep experimenting, and see what you can create with the power of Docker.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you next time.